Rome's traditional system of government, developed to meet the needs of a small city, had proved too unwieldy to administer to a large and complex state of what became the center of the Roman Empire. So Caesar, with his self-confidence and his foresight, could not wait for the tedious machinery of government. He disregarded the traditional republican method in order to govern the cities and the provinces in his own way as a dictator. Caesar's opposition hatched a conspiracy that led to Caesar's assassination by Brutus and some of the other plotters in 44 BC. The assassins, in their turn, were hunted down and killed by Mark Antony, who seized power after Caesar's murder. But Caesar had begun the process that nobody could stop. For the sake of efficient government, the Romans were to give up something of their political freedom forever. Further rivalries between Mark Antony and young Octavian, Caesar's great-nephew, whom the dictator had named his heir apparent. The last battle of the Civil War ended in the defeat of Antony, who was ruling from Alexandria, Egypt. This was the beginning of the Roman Empire. Although Mark Antony and Octavian, now known as Caesar Augustus, had been fighting and creating a lot of havoc in the Roman Empire, in the year 31 BC, Augustus won the Civil War, and he restored peace to that tortured world. And with that peace came new prosperity and new hope and a new vision for Rome's destiny. So in place of the Republic, Augustus established what could be called a constitutional monarchy. He attempted to achieve kind of a balance between government and people and magistrates, the Senate, and the army. But he did it in a way that was completely upholding the old forms of republic, but basically with him as the real power behind it all. He ruled all the way from 31 BC until 14 AD, and during his long rule, he created an extremely well-trained civil service. It was based not on birth, but on merit, which was the best possible form of promotion or advancement, because it brings the best to the top. So he created a postal service and new roads, and he also started to create new jobs for all the poor that were congregating in Rome. He would create public works opportunities. So he built roads, and he also built aqueducts and other building projects around the Roman Empire. Finally, he changed the taxing system. He made it from a very unfair system, which favored the rich and heavily taxed the poor, to being much more of a kind of a graduated tax system where the rich paid more and the poor paid less, which is exactly what needed to happen. And of course, the rich were not happy about it, but it was a more fair and even it was a more reasonable taxing system. In order to be able to tax fairly, he needed to have a number of people in his empire, and this is why he created, he ordered a census to be taken of the entire Roman world, and this is when Jesus was born, during the census taking time. And this census would have taken several years to conduct because of the size of the empire and the magnitude of the administration process that it would involve. But Caesar Augustus was, if anything, one of the best administrators that Rome had ever had. Well, for 50 years after Augustine's death, there was the dynasty that were part of his clan or his people were the Julio-Claudians. That was his last name, and the following members were of his family. The Julian-Claudian clans provided emperors for Rome, such as Tiberius, Claudius, and who was a very sound and able administrator. But there was also others like Caligula or Nero, who were really weak and frivolous men, and they exercised their power kind of stupidly, and they brought a lot of misery to the empire. But there was, even though they were occasionally weak emperors, it didn't hide the fact that the Julio-Claudians had some notable achievements, and one of the biggest ones was that in 43 A.D. they conquered the British Isles. He ended up creating, the Julio-Claudians ended up creating one of the most intricate and well-running administration systems that Rome had ever seen, because it was made up mainly of people of merit, and oftentimes made up of slaves or former slaves that the Julio-Claudian emperors had observed and then promoted into positions of power. One of their big mistakes, however, was that they allowed the military to have a lot of influence in the government. Caesar Augustus had created a special standing force called the Praetorian Guard, and it was like an imperial bodyguard. So in 41 AD, one of the Praetorians murdered Caligula, and under the threat of violence, the Senate ratified the Praetorians' choice for the next emperor. So during the first 3 centuries of the empire, the Praetorian Guard was often murdering emperors and that they were supposed to be protecting, and instating other emperors that were their own choice. One of Rome's best emperors was a man named Hadrian, who became emperor in 117 AD, and he was born in Spain, which is a fact that illustrates the importance of the provinces in Roman politics. Hadrian received an education at Rome, and he became a great admirer of Greek culture. At the age of 19, Hadrian served on the Danube frontier, which is in modern-day, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Germany, that area. And he learned details of how the Roman army functioned, how soldiers lived, and he saw a lot of the problems that there were in defending the frontiers of the Roman Empire. When he became emperor, he made some strategic decisions about how he was going to administrate the Roman Empire. He ended up building a wall across northern England or Scotland in order to help patrol that area. I don't know how successful it was in keeping people out, because it's not a very high wall, but it did give his legions a clear boundary of where their authority was and where they did not need to be patrolling. There were other emperors like Marcus Aurelius, who was the ideal philosopher king. He had a very strong Greek education, and he fit Plato's model of an educated philosopher king. So he was quite well educated, and he ruled reasonably. Some bad emperors were, as we probably already know, Nero, who is supposed to have possibly set fire to Rome, and he definitely blamed the Christians for that. And another baddie was Caligula, who was certifiably insane and had his horse appointed as consul, which was one of the highest positions in the Roman Republic. But it wasn't the Roman Republic anymore, it was the Roman Empire. So the position of consul it was simply a figurehead position. The Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome, was a 200-year period from the rule of Caesar Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, the poet king, and it was a time of great prosperity for the people of Rome. if you were a Roman living within the borders of the Roman Empire, you were probably a farmer, but you experienced a much higher level of living than you would have before the Pax Romana, mainly because there were so many different things available to you for you to buy. There were trade goods from all over the Roman Empire, so you may be eating or drinking Greek wine in a Syrian glass, and you could have dinnerware from France, and olives from the Italian peninsula, all in your humble kitchen in Britain. So things were much more connected than they had been in the past. And if you'd go to not any, but many of the towns that were founded during this time period, they were all built in a similar fashion with a square grid-like pattern to all the streets, and one main street that would point directly towards Rome. They had arrow straight roads that would point directly towards Rome. So the Pax Romana was a time when the Roman legions were the policemen of the empire, and they also helped to maintain those roads that led to Rome. And they had the Roman navy had cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, which made trade that much more easy to do. And there was grain which was pouring in from Egypt. Egypt was a huge breadbasket for the ancient world. It could get up to 3 harvests a year, which was insanely good. That rarely happened. But because of Egypt's perfect situation, it was able to get that kind of harvest. There were trade caravans that traveled all the way to China and back. There is evidence that there was trade with China and Africa and India, and not only trade goods but knowledge as well was coming in and coming into the empire from these distant parts of the world. But along with all the trade goods that were coming in from all these distant parts of the world, there was an increase in the desire for entertainment or distraction. One of the most favorite things for the Roman culture was to go to the gladiatorial games. And these gladiatorial games were made up for the purpose of entertaining massive amounts of people. And oftentimes the gladiators were slaves that had been captured in battle, or were just extremely large or good at what they do, good at fighting, and they were bought by circus masters, basically people who would, or slave traders who specialized in creating these gladiatorial games. So it's hard to imagine going to an event like this where someone's death is the entertainment, but this is how they saw this as a acceptable way of living, or way of becoming entertained. And part of it is because life was not seen as valuably as it is today, and they had a sense that it was appropriate for certain individuals in society to die, and to die publicly. And that belief actually lasted all the way up until the late Middle Ages. I think even all the way up until the 17 or 1800s, where criminals were given very public executions, and it was for entertainment. People would come and watch for the entertainment value. So we are living in a very different culture where we don't see that as the case. Or perhaps maybe we do, because we go to movies where there is a lot of death and violence, and maybe we're placated by the fact that these are not real, but maybe we are participating in something similar. It's something to debate. The Romans also had something called the Circus Maximus, which you will see a picture of the Circus Maximus. This is basically a big racing track for horses, and people would come and bet just like they do today. Kentucky, the Kentucky Derby is a perfect example where fortunes can be won or lost based on a horse race. Also, the government feared the population, and especially in Rome, where there were a lot of jobless people, and they had lost their farms to unscrupulous dealings of the senators and other wealthy patrons in Rome. And so it was kind of mandatory that the government soothe the population by giving them bread and circuses. So there was they would dole out grain and bread to some of the poorest people in Rome. Not necessarily every day, but oftentimes, maybe once a week, that would be the common thing. And finally, there were several different writers who had a lot of warnings against what they saw as Rome's weakening influence of these circuses and the gladiatorial games, but they were largely ignored by the majority of the population. It wasn't until Christianity was adopted by the Roman government that gladiatorial games were stopped, but they were still torturing. But when it flipped from being directed towards Christians to later being directed towards pagans. So the Christians were doing the persecuting of the pagans. So it's interesting how that worked out.